On Christmas Eve 1997, NYPD officer Aya Bria attends an opera at Carnegie Hall. After the first act, everyone in the theater spontaneously combusts except for Aya and an actress, Melissa, on stage. Aya chases after Melissa and she transforms into a monster known as Eve before fleeing. Aya must then discover the secrets of Eve and the reason for her immunity to Eve's powers and save New York City from being destroyed. Parasite Eve is a unique take on a classic JRPG. You only ever control Aya, but instead of just standing your ground and both teams taking swings at each other, you control Aya in real time. This means you can actively dodge most enemies' attacks. It also makes it inherently more engaging. A lot of JRPGs are just snooze fests where you just attack through random battles because there's nothing else for you to do. Even though Parasite Eve is still active time and you have to wait for Aya's turn to come up, you're never just waiting around. You're constantly moving, positioning, and dodging enemy attacks. It's a great combat system that feels fresh and enjoyable. Parasite Eve does feature randomized encounters, but it's more like pseudo-random encounters. It's more based on one or two almost assured encounters per area. Encounters themselves are usually only a few enemies and are fairly quick, so they don't detract from the game too much. You have the ability to customize your guns. You can take certain attributes from one gun and move it onto another. Some things aren't immediately intuitive, like how if a gun has 3 bullets, it means the damage of the gun is divided by the number of bullets. So if you have 150 base damage and 3 bullets, each bullet is going to do 50 damage and not 150 times 3. This is different than if a gun has multi-action. Multi-action is insanely good as it lets you shoot multiple times at full damage or shoot and use a parasite power. Aya has secret magical powers as a result of her altercation with Eve. These function mostly as healing and utility as well as damage spells. Aya's parasite energy constantly refills throughout a battle, so can act as a baseline for healing and give you additional damage if you happen to run out of bullets, which you should never do as they're given away like candy. In New York City, there's no option to free roam. Instead, destinations are chosen via a menu where you travel to them in your police car at the speed of light. Parasite Eve is an original PlayStation game and obviously has some roughness around the edges. It does look reasonably good compared to other games released around the same time in 1998 that also use 3D models as opposed to sprites. The FMVs are quite good and are definitely enjoyable as well as plentiful. Parasite Eve is pretty short and it is a 2-disc game, so there's a good chunk of FMVs to watch and enjoy. Unfortunately, there's no voice acting. The exposition dumps the game has would have been more enjoyable if there was some. The story focuses on what's essentially a bioweapon outbreak in New York City. A being known as Eve can take control of the cellular mitochondria in any animal or person and warp it in various ways. Aya Bria has a mysterious immunity and is the only one who can face off against Eve. The supporting cast deserves special attention, especially Aya's partner Daniel, who has some great moments. The story is enjoyable throughout. Things get pretty weird, and that's going to be something you'll have to take or leave. But as a science fiction body horror thriller, it succeeded. Parasite Eve has a great difficulty curve. You never need to grind. Fighting battles as they come and maintaining your guns means you're always adequately prepared for what comes next. Bosses do have some challenge and you will need to alternate use of your parasite powers and gun to take them down. What can be difficult is something that may not be immediately obvious, and it's not really explained in depth in the game. Weapon upgrades are a fundamental part of Parasite Eve progression. They're much more important than Aya's stats. In fact, you're actually better off dumping your level up stats not into Aya, but into her guns. Dumping some upgrades into your inventory and speed will help initially, but these go up naturally as Aya levels up, so you don't need to dump stats into them. Gun customization is the name of the game in Parasite Eve. You really need to spend time leveling up your guns. You do come across better guns as the game progresses, obviously, but thankfully you have the ability to pull stats over to new weapons using consumables known as tools. There is a point of no return in Parasite Eve, and while it is pretty obvious, it's recommended to keep at least 2 saves throughout the game as you can end up in a position that's seemingly impossible to win. If you're struggling with the boss after the point of no return, you can actually grind in the museum provided you have the backup save. After level 38, level ups happen almost every single encounter, so you can reach a point where you can upgrade your arsenal to take out anything. Normally I try to avoid spoilers, but this is kind of important. After a lengthy final boss fight, your final challenge in Parasite Eve is to escape, and it can be much harder than it appears. First, it tricks you with the guise of a save point, and taking it will kill you. Next, you're forced to run down corridors, and taking the wrong path will kill you, forcing you to redo the entire final boss fight. This part isn't particularly difficult, but a failure here is disgustingly punishing because of the length of the boss fight. RPGs usually suffer from being too long-winded with a lot of obnoxious filler. Parasite Eve is extremely focused and curated. There is virtually zero filler, and everything feels important to the narrative and gameplay. This playthrough clocked in at 7 hours and 27 minutes on the dot. My first playthrough of Parasite Eve ever clocked in at 11.5 just because I ended up having to grind at the museum because I didn't level up my guns throughout the game, but was on pace for about a 9-hour completion time. It's story focused like most JRPGs, but there's very little fluff. A few areas like the hospital can be a bit long-winded due to some triggers being difficult to find. A good amount of time was spent wandering around trying to find a keycard to progress, and it was frustrating because that particular area was explored numerous times. The trigger is just a very specific spot that's hard to get to. There is some bonus content in Parasite Eve. There's an optional area during the main game which yields some powerful weaponry and an optional boss. After completing the game, you're allowed to mark one gun and one piece of armor to carry over into New Game Plus. Aya's level, and this gear is retained for additional playthroughs. In New Game Plus, you also gain access to the Chrysler building, which is a pseudo-random 100-floor dungeon that you can work through for more powerful gear and a new boss for the true ending. New Game Plus is a great feature because it lets you replay the game with your endgame levels and gear, and it's always welcome in JRPGs when you just want to burn through it fast to experience the story again. Parasite Eve is a nice JRPG. It's short and sweet, with very little in terms of fluff and filler. The exposition dumps can be dry, but the story is interesting and fairly unique. The combat system is one of the highlights, and is inherently more engaging than most JRPGs by forcing you to actually dodge attacks in real time. The difficulty is appropriate, but you can end up in a bad situation if you don't keep multiple saves and spend the majority of the game leveling up your guns instead of Aya's base stats. The option of New Game Plus with bonus content and the ability to carry over equipment and Aya's level make it a great option to return to later if you want to experience the story again. Parasite Eve gets recommended playing's most prestigious verdict of recommended.